Please give a warm welcome to former acting U.S. Attorney General Matt Whitaker, Utah DA David Levitt, York County PA DA David Sunday, and Pinal County, Arizona DA Kent Volkmer.
Thank you. Thank you. Wherever. Thank you. It's up to you. There you go. David, Kent.
Well, hello, ALEC. Thanks for having us. We're going to have a discussion about criminal justice reform, and really, this is something we could talk about all day if we wanted to. And I think the first thing that I'd like to ask the district attorneys here, if they join me, is to talk a little bit about an area of criminal justice reform that you've implemented in your district, and how that could be a model for other districts and other states. David?
All right, I'll kick it off. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here. I think that everyone understands that right now we are living in a world where criminal justice is being debated, rightfully, on a daily basis. We see it on TV every day. We see it all throughout our community. And the reality is, as a prosecutor and as a DA, we all have the absolute duty to keep our community safe. And with that being said, as we look at ways to make our community safe, we have to think outside of the box and we have to be creative. I firmly believe that the vast majority of reform-minded thoughts and reform-minded initiatives that we are all working on are things that are conservative in nature. And one of the things in York County that we have put a tremendous amount of work into is what's called a reentry coalition. So typically, around 95% of every single person that goes into prison, they're coming back out. No matter what the crimes are, 95% come back out. Of the 95% that come back out, around half of them within 3 years go right back to jail. And one of the driving identifiable factors with regard to why they go back to prison is joblessness. And we're very good at prosecutors at trying cases, taking people to court, convicting people. And in York County, we have a lot of very serious crimes that require that. But with that being said, we have to think and we have to get ahead of the game. So what we did was we partnered with our community leaders within York County, and we created what's called a reentry coalition, where the district attorney's office actually helps individuals who leave prison get jobs. We work to break down barriers to reentry. We work to identify issues such as homelessness and things that drive people's ability to recidivize when they get home. This is very, very important because we know the trauma on children when their parents are constantly taken in and out of their home. And we know, and the data is overwhelming, that the more that happens, the impact on these children decreases their ability to read at the proper level and also decreases their ability and likelihood of graduation. So we want to keep people working. When people work, they're less likely to commit more crimes. They pay taxes. They become active members of their community. They can provide an example for their children. And ultimately what that does, it saves us time, it saves us money, and it ultimately makes our community safer.
Yeah, and David, when we talk about some of these reforms, we're not saying just reduce sentences or somehow go easier on people committing crimes. Well, criminal justice reform, and like we did with the First Step Act or other things that you're doing in the kind of your laboratories of innovation in the states and the counties that you work, can be broad and disparate, but the bottom line is always public safety and always putting more resources into the police and law enforcement, not less. Well, why don't you comment about that, David?
Well, the goal is absolutely public safety. And we have to understand that everyone we prosecute is someone's mother or father, son and daughter, and they're going to, whether they go away to prison for a short time or a long time, they're going to come back and live among us. And the question is, are they going to come back and be better because of their involvement in the criminal justice system, or are they going to come back and be worse because of their position in the criminal justice system? Under our current model, people who enter the criminal justice system, generally speaking, come back as worse individuals. And so if we're looking at public...
Or better criminals.
Or better criminals,
Right.
That's right. And And so if we're looking at the public safety, we have to look at the long range, because we can short load public safety, we can front load public safety by putting all of the bad guys in prison. But what that really means is that we are mortgaging our future in public safety. And in my office, my efforts are these. Our founders gave us a constitution to form a government. They gave us a legislative branch to make laws, an executive to enforce them, and a judiciary to keep those two powers in harmony with each other. And the principle of the Constitution, one of the main principles of the Constitution, is that power should be diffused from not only one group of people, but especially from one individual. And the problem with our criminal justice system today is that, it's for a lot of different reasons that time won't permit to go into all of those reasons, but the bottom line is this, is that the criminal justice system in any jurisdiction is entirely run by the elected prosecutor. And we can investigate anyone, we can charge anyone, we can give a plea bargain to anyone, and we have, surprisingly, almost unfettered immunity for our actions. And so, if you look at the way the criminal justice system has evolved, there really is nothing more un-American than the American prosecutorial model. And so, what we are working on doing is saying, okay, what did the founders really intend? Did they really intend a prosecutor to be able to give a plea bargain 99% of the time? And a plea bargain means this, essentially, that the government doesn't have to prove the allegations that the government makes against a fellow citizen.
Right.
And can anyone, whether you're a conservative or a liberal, agree or disagree with the notion that the government should prove its case every time it makes an allegation against someone? Right. And so the way we solve our criminal justice issues is to return to the basic principles that the founders gave us, and that is returning power to people through the power that they gave them through the jury trial, and reducing the prosecutorial power that comes from
Let me bring Kent on this discussion. Is one possibility to address criminal justice system to add more criminal laws and to prosecute more people, because that will keep us safe?
Certainly not. Certainly not. In Arizona, we did a study about 2 years ago, and I believe it was 6, 7, almost 800 cases, laws that are on the books that prosecutors have prosecuted less than 5 times in the last decade. There's actually a core set of crimes that we typically prosecute, and adding more laws isn't really what we need. I will tell you that it was Albert Einstein who was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting... It was Albert Einstein that said, that makes a lot more sense. Yeah. Albert Einstein told us, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. And that's what we've been doing. You've heard my colleagues talk about how we need to be smarter about crime, and that's really what this is about. This is being smart, because we just do the same thing. We just throw people in prison, and we hope and pray and cross our fingers and hope that they're going to come back members of society. The reality is there's nothing that would suggest for the vast majority of people that go to prison that they're better off when they come back to our community. So we need to start looking at that at the forefront of what our decision making is. And really what that means to me is prison really needs to be a last resort. Now, prison's necessary, and there's not one person here or one prosecutor that would tell you, at least I would hope, that prison isn't necessary. But it needs to be the last option. We should be exhausting everything else that we possibly can. And I will tell you that there's a way that we can check to see if we'll be successful. There's something called the UCR, the Uniform Crime Reports, where every state reports those numbers. And it actually acts as a check on what we do. And I can tell you for Pinal County, I get a chance to brag for just a second. I'm kind of a data nerd. I love looking at the numbers. I love looking at what's happening. And what we've done is when a person comes in, we've made a concerted effort to sort of decide who's a dangerous person and who's a person that made a dumb choice. And if we separate those and we treat those that are dangerous, those are the people we're looking at in prison. But those that made poor choices, that made dumb decisions, those we're looking at, what can we do to restore these people? What can we do to make them a part of our community? And that's where programs like diversion come in. That's where programs like your specialty courts, your drug courts, your veterans courts, all of these various courts, because they're focused on actually restoring the person. It's a poor analogy, but if you think of Humpty Dumpty, falls on the wall, and his friends have to put him all back together again, all of his men. Well, sometimes people have pieces missing. The idea behind a diversion program, the idea behind specialty programs, people need a little bit more than the average person, but if we can give them that piece, they can come back to our community as productive members of our society. As David Sunday said, they come back as tax-paying, working members of our community, and that's really, I think, where our focus needs to be.
Yeah, David Sunday, what do you think? We're in a room full of state legislators. And what are the resources? I know as a prosecutor, having been in the federal government, as a U.S. attorney and then at Maine Justice, everybody wanted more resources. But what are the types of tools that state legislatures could give prosecutors to accomplish these types of more, I don't know if it's discretionary enforcement of the laws, but maybe a broader kind of menu of options to deal with the different types of offenders that you see?
So in typical attorney fashion, I'm going to sort of not answer your question, but I'm going to do my best to.
Doug Collins saw me do that for 6.5 hours in front of the House Judiciary Committee.
The reality is this. The reality is this, that society has the right to demand that their government keeps them safe. And that is an absolute that I believe. And all of us come from different counties and have different challenges. We have, in the county that I'm from, we have a tremendous amount of gang violence. We have, and that's something that we have to deal with on almost a daily basis. And what we found is that to keep the community safe, you have to do everything you can to address every issue that exists. And I hate to say it like that. So we have around 10,000 criminal cases in York County. Around, I'd say 30% of those cases are people who need to go to jail. Those are people that have shot individuals or tried to shoot someone, child abuse cases, elder abuse cases.
Unloaded a fully automatic AR in a roof of a car.
We did have that happen as well. And those people need to go to jail for the protection of society. We then turn to everybody else. What do we do with those people that constantly come in and out of prison? Every time they come out, the data is overwhelming that they will commit more crimes. And we have to stop that because it is destroying our communities financially, it's destroying families, and I think that families critically need to be, they need to be together. When you look, and I bet everyone in this room, if they sat down and we conducted an analysis and said, why are people shooting each other? No matter where your starting point is, the end point, in my opinion, is almost always the family and the lack thereof. And as elected officials, as prosecutors, we can't fix that. So what can we fix? We can do everything we can to make sure that we have mental health services, because our prisons have truly become warehouses for people with severe mental health illness. I think it's an absolute travesty the way that we have handled that. We're not made to do that. We don't have the expertise to do that, but that's what we do every single day. I think we need funding for mental health treatment. I think we need additional funding for proper and meaningful addiction treatment. Okay. The other issue is here, when we talk about treatment and we talked about treatment courts, we have to get back to a place where our laws are such that there is always accountability. If there is no accountability to the individual that committed the crime, then they're just going to keep doing it. And accountability can be very many different things. And I know some of my colleagues up here have figured out many creative ways to hold people accountable that actually have better results than taking someone and just throwing them into a prison.
Well, why don't we turn it to David? Why don't you talk about your experience of immediate accountability instead of this years-long process?
Right. Well, the best kind of deterrent to criminal conduct is swift punishment that is tied to the offense and is proportional to the crime. And the way our system works currently with our very important due process rights, which we all agree we need to have, if I charge someone today they follow through the process, they're not going to get a sentence or a conviction or a punishment for another 10 or 12 months. By that point, what they did is the connection is completely lost with the punishment. And so what I'm doing in Utah County, which is the county just south of here, it's Utah's second largest county, what I'm doing is saying, listen, if you'll come in, I'm going to give you a swift, severe punishment now. It's far more severe that you're going to get in the court system, but in exchange for that, I'll agree that your sanction will be swift, but it will be tied to what you're doing, to your crime, and it will help you to become a better person, and I'll not put you through the court system, so that you won't be a criminal. But I really want to dispel one idea, and that is that criminal justice reform is being soft on crime. It's not. And to give you just a couple of brief examples, in Utah County, as in most places, we prosecute every shoplifting case that gets caught. Traditionally speaking, if you steal a bag of potato chips or a Diet Coke, you're going to get prosecuted. However, if you steal $100,000, we don't even investigate that because we don't have the resources to investigate that level of crime. And so I say frequently to people, it is easier to steal $100,000 in any county in Utah than it is to steal a Snickers bar from a convenience store. And we have to change that. And that becomes something that you can help us with as legislators. And I will say, I'll give a shout out to the Utah legislators that are here. Representative Kevin Stratton, who proposed a bill that required, for example, Office of Recovery Services to give the names and the amounts owed of back child support to prosecutors, something that they didn't want to do. We got our first list, and in Utah County alone, there are 1,300 primarily men who owe felony amounts in child support to the tune of over $34 million. And so we have all these primarily women, but single parents who are working second and third jobs, yet and we do nothing about that, yet we're prosecuting every shoplifting case. And so we have to realign our priorities to find out that true criminal justice reform really means prosecuting the crimes that hurt people the most, not simply the crimes that we're used to prosecuting.
Right. Ken, state legislators obviously have constituents. Those constituents expect severe punishment for bad actors. But that turns into oftentimes mandatory minimums that take away some flexibility of a prosecutor or otherwise may make cases more difficult to handle or to get a proper outcome. Why don't you talk a little bit about your experience in Arizona? And I know every state is a little different with sentencing, and so it's a little tricky. Your mileage may vary, but I think it's interesting to hear your story, Kent.
Our mandatory minimums are very, very progressive. So after you have, in your entire life, have ever been convicted of a single felony, it is mandatory that you go to prison for any second felony. That includes if you were an 18-year-old kid back in the 70s and got caught with some maybe recreational drugs, you were convicted of a felony. Fast forward, now you're 50, 60 years old, and something happens, you make a bad decision, you get caught doing dumb things, and under our state law, if that person goes to trial, it's mandatory that they go to prison. I will tell you conceptually, logically, that makes absolutely no sense. Just to kind of put it in perspective, if you go to prison, the likelihood of you being rearrested within 9 years is 83%. Or excuse me, 83% will be rearrested. That means 5 out of every 6 people that we place in prison will be rearrested. And rearrested doesn't maybe sound that terrible, other than that means they victimized somebody else. You don't get arrested because you're jaywalking. You're victimizing people. And what we found and what David Levitt was talking about was really a pretrial diversion or a pre-indictment diversion. Those people that get those severe, quick consequences immediately, don't have to go through the criminal justice system, aren't facing prison, but instead can get quick, swift, and appropriate and proportionate consequences. We find out that less than 10% of those recidivate. So think about that difference. If we send you to prison, it's almost a sure thing you're going to recidivate. If we don't send you to prison and we actually give you services, it's a pretty good sure bet that you're not going to recidivate. Yet we create essentially an incentive that places everybody in prison, and it also creates a disproportionate authority in the criminal justice system. Everybody wants to get mad at judges. The reality is that the gentleman sitting on the stage and the ladies and gentlemen that are elected, I think there's 2,400 give or take DAs and prosecutors that are elected or appointed. They're the ones that are making the decisions, because when you put all those mandatory minimums in place, if I offer a defendant anything less than the minimum sentence, they have to take it, because our courts have no ability to do anything less. So what you end up getting is very disproportionate punishments that really don't make sense. I'm going to talk about a very kind of touchy one here, but just to put it in perspective, child pornography in Arizona is 10-year minimum sentence, mandatory stack for every image. So that means if one person downloads 10 images, it's a minimum sentence. They must spend 100 years in prison under the very best case scenario. So if I were to offer them any offer whatsoever, they're going to take it, because anything's less than 100 years. But what ends up happening with that is we're cutting the judges out. It is the prosecutors, and to David Levitt's point, it's one person, one elected person, me, David Sunday, and all of other electeds. Matt, when he was prosecuting, we're the ones that's really making the decision how long somebody's going to prison, and they are at our control. I will tell you, fundamentally, when you're talking about people's freedom, that's a very uncomfortable position to be in, and something that I think you as legislators should look seriously at. Is that the system that we really want? Is that the American system where I become my own little mini dictator in my jurisdiction? I mean, there's only 15 counties in Arizona. I have 500,000 people that are subjected to my will. Now, fortunately, I'm a good guy. But if I'm not, it's
we'll
dangerous.
Be the judge of that. So, David Sunday, along those lines, I mean, we have state legislators in this room that I'm sure have watched over the last several decades where judges have been lenient on criminals. They've gotten out, they've committed more crimes, and so that's why they put in place these mandatory minimum sentences. And so that has given the prosecutors more power, taking it away from the judges in sentencing. Where is that balance to find the way to deal with each individual in their unique facts and circumstances, but at the same time make sure that the people are represented in getting justice?
So there's two parts to that. The first part is, in Pennsylvania, we do not have that type of mandatory sentencing structure. That went away maybe 6 or 7 years ago as a result of a United States Supreme Court case. We have one for first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and multiple rape and cases where there's child victims. And so it really does give a tremendous amount of leeway, and you have a tremendous amount of prosecutorial discretion in handling these cases. I think very simply, though, the way that in Pennsylvania, the way our guidelines are set up, for the people that commit the most serious offenses, they do go to jail for a very long time. And I want to circle back real quick to the comment that was made earlier on how do you communicate to the public about some of these issues. So we have treatment courts in York County as well. And I remember I was going through our community and I was talking to some very conservative areas of the county, and I had some people look at me and they said, well, what are you doing? Well, we're giving them treatment court. And they're like, well, is that jail? And I said, well, you stop in once a week and you have to have a job and all kinds of stuff. And they said, well, that's terrible. And I said, well, hold on. What if I told you that our drug court saved York County taxpayers $1.9 million in saved prison costs last year, and also that recidivism has gone down tremendously for all the people that went through it? Oh, well, that sounds like a nice program. And so a lot of it really comes down to education, because so many people in the community are so misinformed with what the system is, how it works, how people are sentenced. And initiatives like that, not only do they save money, again, they keep families together, they keep people from committing additional crimes. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. No one has enough resources to do this alone. No one. No police department, the feds don't, the DAs don't. And so we have got to leverage each other's assets and also do it in a smarter way to achieve an even better result. And I think that's where the crux of what I think the legislative thought should be around. How do we keep our community safer with that in mind?
Yeah. And David Levitt, I mean, philosophically, when you send somebody to prison, is there any hope that they're rehabilitated, or are we just training better criminals? I mean, is there a system or a way, or have you seen anywhere across this country that has figured out how to actually improve people's lives so when they do re-enter, that they have a less likelihood of reoffending?
Yeah, that's a great question, and let me answer it this way. One of the greatest temptations when you are in criminal justice is to delude yourself that what you're doing is actually making a difference. We're going to send someone to prison, and we can tell ourselves, whether we're a prosecutor, a legislator, a judge, or whatever, that person's going to get help. And while you can put a poster child here and a poster child there for someone that comes out and is different, the vast majority of the time, when you go to prison, you come out as a worse individual than you were when you got there. And there's a man by the name of Mark Hugentobler who lives in Utah in Sanpete County, who was a high school basketball coach, and he was assigned to be the principal of the local prison in the Gunnison facility. And he wrote a book when he retired called All My Friends Are Felons. And I'd encourage any of you to Google that to try to find it, All My Friends Are Felons, because really what it does is it details his experience inside prison for 8 years, and it is a very powerful description of what happens, at least inside of Utah prisons.
Yeah.
And it's not positive. No, it's not positive at all.
But how, along that same line, Kent, how can legislatures work with prosecutors and other stakeholders to fix that, to make sure that it's not just stacking cordwood for a period of time and then releasing criminals back into society?
We really do need to fix the model of punishment. Punishment needs to occur swiftly. It needs to be proportionate to what they did, but it needs to be somehow related to how they're going to get better. And so legislators can educate themselves on this, but also take the realization that it's a tough stand to take when you're going to say, well, I'm going to give somebody treatment or a job rather than prison, because then you run the risk of being labeled soft on crime. I'm often labeled soft on crime. I will say that I'm the only prosecutor in Utah County in 40 years to charge the death penalty. Nevertheless, I've been willing to take the stand and say we have to change this. And so my advice to you is to have the political courage and the political will to take a stand that's based on common sense and humanity and on freedom, rather than on what's going to help us get the most votes next time.
Yeah, and I think along that same line, Kent, we're not going to get down to 0% recidivism. There's going to be a percent of people that are sociopaths or are just never going to improve their lives. But there are programs, and I saw this at the Bureau of Prisons, because one of the great things about the Department of Justice, we had statistics as far as the eye can see, and so I knew that our drug treatment program worked, reduced recidivism, and our prison industries work program that taught skills and trades made a difference and improved people's lives. So there were at least two things that we had scientific, statistical data. What's been your experience in the types of reforms at the prison level and criminal justice that can actually change people's lives for the better, knowing that we're not going to change everybody's life?
Well, again, I think it's distinguishing those that are truly dangerous from those that aren't, because we do have limited resources. And when you place those resources on those who aren't dangerous, what I have found and what our community has found is those that have ties to our community, those that have ties to a robust mentorship program, that have ties to reentry programs, have a very high likelihood of reintegrating into our community. But the problem is, if we don't have a plan to reintroduce people back from a prison, what happens, and this is a shocking fact, but your drug dealer will always come pick you up at prison. If they find you're out, they will come pick you up and they will give you a little hit again. You may have the very best of intentions, and unfortunately, a lot of people, by the time they go to prison, they've burned a lot of bridges with their families. And their families are saying, I'm done, I can't take this anymore. So what happens is there's no one to pick them up. So they call the one person they know they will, and that's their drug dealer. When we see those people that come back, and it doesn't have to be family, again, it can be mentorship, it can be reentry programmings, but when there's a plan to reintegrate them into our society, they do a really, really good job of reintegrating. But again, that reintegration is housing, and that reintegration is jobs. And oftentimes it's mental health and substance abuse. Again, I'm very familiar with Arizona. more than 80% of people in the state of Arizona prison have a significant history of substance use. They're drug addicts. 75% have had issues with mental health. So that's who's being incarcerated. And we put these people in prison, we don't give them treatment, and then we open our doors and say, you know, I'll teach you a lesson that way. We collectively need to figure out how we can bridge that gap from that return, from when they're being released to when they return. Because if we don't, they're going to fall back into the same patterns. They're going to commit those same offenses again. They're going to re-victimize people, and you're going to see on the headlines that all these awful events that are occurring. And part of it, I take responsibility from our office and us as a government, because we're not here to necessarily solve problems, but we can certainly properly fund programs and give options and alternatives to help facilitate this return to the community. And if we don't, that's why I quoted Einstein earlier, we're just going to see the same thing over and over. And in 25 years, all of our successors are going to be up here having a very similar conversation with a very similar group, probably your successors.
Yeah, with the limited time we have, David Sunday, what do you think is the one area, if Pennsylvania state legislator invested in the criminal justice reform, that you think they could get the most bang for the buck?
Well, I think to start, we have to make sure we have the infrastructure to properly track the data. So anyone that works in well, everyone here does, but like we know data is a very difficult thing sometimes to track, especially in a Commonwealth where you have everybody has different mechanisms by which they keep certain data. Nothing that we do, no policy that's enacted, can put us in a position where the reverse of what we want is occurring, meaning everything we do must make the community safer. So if there are people out there, and we all know that there are some in certain places, whose policies they've enacted have actually resulted in some of the highest murder rates that they've seen literally ever. Clearly that's a problem. And clearly someone needs to take a deep dive and look at that and say, what is happening over here in this city that may or may not be in the state that I'm from, okay? And we have to understand why, because what happens is when we don't understand why, none of this matters, because people will automatically equate these initiatives to that, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And so one of the things I would ask is there should truly be robust, thoughtful dialogue on a national scale about criminal justice. And it is so important because criminal justice doesn't fit nicely within the election cycle, right? This is one of those things where we have to basically say to ourselves, we're going to give everything we have professionally, emotionally, and we may not see the results of this for decades. And the only way that that can happen, unfortunately, due to the nature of society, is if we sort of bring people together, we mandate it, and we just have to have a better way to work together for that long-term growth so we know what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. And I think that's, you know, the gentleman that brought us together in this panel, David Safavian at ACU, I think has been working in the States on some of these reforms. Same question to you, David Levitt. What's the one thing here in Utah that if they could change the law that would give the most bang for the buck and make people safer but get better outcomes for your citizens?
You know, the one thing that's a very difficult question to answer in the 60 seconds that I've got. And so I'd like to just back away from that and talk about a principle.
Okay.
That's okay. And just simply say, we all want the same things. We want safe streets. We want safe homes, safe schools, safe communities. We want the ability to reach our dreams, to be safe. And we need to understand that whenever there's a crime committed, our concept of justice can't be accomplished. We can't unmurder anyone. We can't unrape anyone. We can't unfinancially devastate anyone. But people are being raped and murdered and financially devastated on a daily basis. And so the most that I would say that you could do is not a law to change it or to do it away, but to realize this is not a conservative issue. It's not a liberal issue. It's an American issue. It's a human issue. It affects every one of us, and every one of us who are trying to fix it, we're all good people. The police, I admire them. They're good people. The defense attorneys are good people. The judges, the prosecutors. But we're operating within a system that is so broken that it is running us. And that's what we need to change. Figure out a way so that we run the system rather than the system running us.
Yeah. Ken, is there anything in Arizona that they could wave their magic wand and again, get the best bang for the buck, but keep the people safe?
Front load everything. Front load diversion programs, front load probation alternatives. Once we brand that person with the scarlet F for a felon, their life is forever changed, and it's not for the better. The more we can do to divert them out of the system, to deflect them out of the system, the better off they're going to be, the better off their family's going to be, the better off our community's going to be. We focus so much on the actual prison and whether the prison sentence is too long, too short. We need to focus on keeping them out of prison and front-loading services.
Good. Well, Kent, David, thank you all for being here. I think each one of us is willing, able, and ready to be a resource if you have specific questions for your state, as well as our friend David Safavian with the American Conservative Union. We can do this together. It is conservative criminal justice reform exists. It can happen. I worked on it in the First Step Act in the Trump administration. So God bless you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time.
Great job, man.